Thanks for tuning in to the Pacey Performance Podcast. So this morning, I am delighted to welcome Barry Drust. So welcome to the podcast, mate.
Morning. How are you, Rob?
I'm very well, thank you. Yeah, very well. It's taken a while, but I'm glad we're finally there. It's a pleasure to speak to you.
Yeah, we've talked about this a bit, but we've never really, I guess, found something that we could both think was interesting enough to talk about.
Mm-hmm. Which is,
and maybe this isn't. Let's see.
We'll see where the next 45 minutes to an hour takes us. But I'm really interested to speak to you, which is why we've spoken about it for so long. But anyone that doesn't know who you are, just want to give us a bit of an intro on your background, what you're currently doing, education-wise, and just let me preface that with Patrick Ward will be delighted this is happening, because every time we speak, need to get Barry on. So hopefully this will deliver.
Well, yeah, no pressure. Well, where do you start, I guess? And I guess I'm only asking where do you start, just so I don't go on too long and bore people. I did my sports science degree back in the early 90s and was lucky enough to do a PhD with the late Tom Riley between 1993 and 1997. And my PhD was focused on physiology of football, actually. And so around the time, I think I was probably one of the first people who was doing something in a very focused way around football physiology. And towards the end of that, I had a bit of a crisis of confidence, like who was going to employ me, what was I going to do? And so I went for a job at the University of Teesside because I had some mates up in Middlesbrough, actually. Was lucky enough to get the job, but delayed starting for 3 months until I finished my PhD. Now, around that time, Steve Gibson had taken over Middlesbrough Football Club. And Middlesbrough were going through that period of signing high-profile players. And the high-profile players were, I guess, frustrated, I suppose, by the infrastructure around the club, training facilities and things like that. And so the club approached the university and a guy called Chris Barnes, who I know you know very well, who had given me the job at Middlesbrough. And so before I started my job at Teesside, my contract had actually changed from a full-time academic contract to a contract where I spent part of the time in the university and part of the time at Middlesbrough Football Club. And actually that project was really, really innovative. They built a lab, they put equipment in it, they had a link with the university. So I was part of that, that initial kind of, I suppose, in some ways, wave of sports science and football. And then following that, really, I guess I've predominantly always been employed by an academic institution, and I've moved around a little bit. I'm currently at the University of Birmingham after a long time at Liverpool John Moores. But I've always had a foot in the football camp, really, insofar as I ran the science and football program for a long time at Liverpool John Moores, which was all around, I guess, trying to facilitate the development of individuals who were interested in the science of football, and a lot of those guys have gone on to do jobs in the industry. I also, for probably about 10 years now, have been involved in a PhD training program with Liverpool Football Club, and again, that program's been incredibly successful in facilitating, I guess, the translation of research and also developing training opportunities for people in the researcher practitioner space. And then I also had a little stint as a consequence of I guess, some of my previous experience in football of working with the FA. And for a 4-year period, I was lucky enough to be the England men's senior exercise physiologist. So I went to 2 European Championships and 1 World Cup, both of which were pretty disastrous in terms of results. Which again is like a really unique place to work. So, I've been really, really lucky, really, in always having this dual position, this academic role, but this insight into what's going on in the industry. And I guess as a consequence of that, I've been really lucky to work with some really talented people on their pathways into sport. And do some really cool projects or really cool projects in my own mind, really.
I was speaking to Warren Gregson the other day for the first time. I didn't realise that he was part of that Middlesbrough crew in the early days. There's quite a few names
Yeah,
that people would know who
yeah,
actually even came through that system or started there or just,
yeah.
had a little bit of time there.
So Warren was my first PhD student actually.
Nice.
So yeah.
So who else? So Chris, yourself, Warren, who else
Yeah,
came through
a
that?
guy called Reese Thatcher.
Okay.
He was the other PhD student at the time. There was two academics, there was two PhD students, there was a technician, and there was a full-time fitness coach whose name escapes me currently, which is terrible, really. But he didn't stick around too long actually, and in the end, Chris became the full-time fitness coach actually. So that was Chris's transition from the university at the time into full-time football. And then there was a guy called Peter Hood, who I think actually is still at the club
Still
actually.
there. Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, a really innovative project, like so far ahead of its time. And it's really quite interesting, isn't it? How I think Man United, probably put a lab in Carrington. I want to say around the um, maybe late 90s, mid 2000s, kind of around that period. And I guess like with anything that Man United do, there's this big fanfare, understandably, but it was almost like a project, I guess, that had been done a number of years before, really. Though not in the same way, and obviously somewhere that has a lot less ability to attract the attention of the media, and apart from in some cases challenging things in Middlesbrough, unfortunately.
Mm-hmm. I know that the aim wasn't, or doesn't sound like it was to get in professional sport. It was to get a job at Teesside University. But in professional sport, or specifically football at that time, was the people going through PhDs to that pathway? There was pretty much no pathway because there was no fitness
Yeah,
coaches in that kind of roles.
yeah. Well, I mean, I think what I would say is the aim was to get a job at University of Teesside because there wasn't really any jobs in professional sport. Like around that time, I think UK sport had got some kind of like funded PhDs, and those guys in designated kind of like athletic events. I know there was a guy called Phil Graham Smith who did the one around that time in long jump and triple jump, right? So Phil was doing a PhD and he was working with the coaches and the athletes, and there were probably some, I guess, like fitness coaches in. I guess in European football at the time, but there wasn't many around the UK. And actually, when I first did that role in Middlesbrough, it was kind of me on the field, like doing warm ups and taking speed endurance sessions and things like that, and it was only really probably in subsequent years to that, I guess, that there's been some role differentiation, and now we have. I mean, we have really specific roles now, don't we? Like data analysts, sports scientists, strength and conditioners, end stage rehab. But back then, really, I mean, it was just like if you were in a club, I guess you were doing everything really.
Mm-hmm.
Probably like the lower divisions now, maybe in some cases, right?
Yeah. I think this just shows. I mean, not to make you feel old, but the guys that coming in that you're dealing with who are potentially going through PhDs, maybe just think these things were, around forever when not that long ago there was nothing. It shows you how new the industry is from an elite sport point of view.
Yeah, and like hugely, really. I mean, I just think I remember having a footballer throw a heart rate monitor at me, and that wasn't someone at Middlesbrough actually. I mean, that was when I was doing some data collection for my PhD. And that was probably 1993. And so actually, we've come a really long way in a short space of time because that wouldn't happen now. Because the guys now who are senior players, right, have just grown up with this stuff in the academies, and it's almost like now they walk out onto the field and it's boots, GPS, yeah, shin pads. It's just like part of their kit, and I'm not sure they're all massively aware of what it is or what it does or what it gives people in that, right? But they just know that they've either got it on or they haven't, and they should have it on, and so they better go and get it if they haven't. So yeah, look, I mean, I think that trajectory actually has been huge, and it still amazes me, like I'm involved in writing a book chapter at the minute for a revision of the Science in Soccer book, which has been really popular, I guess. I think it's probably in its third or fourth edition, right? And so I thought, well, you know what? I better check the literature yesterday, because I don't want to write something that's old if I can help it. And PubMed does this really nice thing now where it kind of like tells you how many papers in your
Oh
search
yeah,
have been published in how many years, right?
yeah, yeah.
And I would just like I put in training load monitoring yesterday, and like in the last 2 years, I mean, there's been something like 600 to 1,000 papers or something ridiculous, and I was just like, my God, like how is someone supposed to read all of these and keep up with all of these, and like how fast is it going? So yeah, look, I mean, I think it has been a really short space of time. The opportunities now are incredible, and all the people I've been lucky enough to work with to get their PhDs and things got loads better jobs than me, right? But in turn, I had lots of experiences that Tom Riley didn't have the opportunity to have, right? So, it's the same for every generation, right? Like, and all we really do is stand on the shoulders of the people before us. Now, some of us are more cognate of that than others, but that's all we're really doing,
Mhm.
for sure. Like, we're not doing anything that's necessarily revolutionary.
With that and the amount of research that is been pumped out, especially like you say in the last 2 years, and just train load monitoring as a good example, how do you do that? How do you keep up with that? And how do you guide others to be able to keep up with that? Is there any specific ways that you go about it? I'm just thinking because there's a number of like research review services that do this kind of thing, but that's obviously dependent on the quality of the person who's going through the research with how that's delivered and all that kind of stuff. But is there any way that you go about that or guide other people to go about that?
I mean, there are some great things now that actually, you can kind of like register for like a web service, right? And it will effectively, I guess, email you the contents of certain journals that you select. So those things are a help. I mean, to be honest with you, I think it's really difficult, and I don't read enough actually. One of the things I want to do in 2021 is spend more time reading, right? Because it's really important. So I suppose how I navigate it, I mean, like I'm lucky enough to have students, and so often, they bring a lot of interesting stuff to me, which is one of the really exciting things about working with them, really. And I guess I'm also lucky enough to have a number of conversations in the week with other people, right, who are reading stuff or who are doing stuff, So, uh, like it's a challenge, but it's also a positive. If you've got like large bandwidth and you're able to talk to people who work in clubs, and you're able to talk to other academics, and you're able to jump on Twitter, and you're able to get these kind of email alerts and that. Do you know what I mean? You are able to really, I guess, get a feel for what's going on. But you do become much more, I suppose, in some ways, of a kind of generalist and a specialist. So I'm not sure my knowledge is especially deep anymore in some areas. I guess I just know enough about enough things at times to help me navigate around stuff, but then do definitely have the ability then to go deep if I need to, and can probably go deep relatively quickly. I guess just because of the skills, I guess, that you build over the years. I mean, some people get better at handling a group in a warm up, right? I suppose like someone like me, hopefully in some ways, just gets better at being able to extract key information and 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 not get bogged down in loads of detail in some cases that doesn't really matter.
Mhm. Does that come with experience, Barry? Is that just come with
Yeah,
experience?
yeah, it definitely comes with experience, and just being able to, I guess, like missteps. So I mean, I've never done this before with you, right? So today, I pulled the email up last night. I checked my headphones. I put them on charge. I went in the email today. Everything that was happening, I was like, all right, need to do that. Need to do that. Need to do that. If you sent me a research paper, for example, I mean, and this is a really interesting thing. I often talk to students about, well, how do you read a research paper? And often they start on line 1 right and finish on line 377 or whatever it is. I mean, often I'll read the abstract and then I'll read the method, and often then I won't read anymore, because I've largely made a decision on reading the abstract and whether I think it's any good or not. And when I mean any good, I mean, I just think it's like, well, what can I use this for? And one of the things I guess we're talking about research, really. I mean, there's loads of information out there, right? And I suppose it's about quality of evidence, and I suppose like when I read something like the method, I make a judgment call on how good then I think the evidence is that's coming from the paper. And then that kind of dictates how much time I'm really going to spend on really trying to get hold of it in my head.
So what is it? I mean, I know this is we could spend the next 45 minutes on this, but I think from my experience, and I'm guessing, and this has been the whole thing about the podcast. If I kind of struggle with something, if I find something interesting, guessing that people do. So it's probably the methods that people struggle the most with, method and results people struggle with. So what is it that you're looking for? What key things are you looking for which make you either dive deeper or push to the side and go somewhere else?
Yeah. So, like good research, right? Like answers the question that it's trying to answer. And that sounds really simple, right? But I mean, like, it's actually not as easy as it sounds to do. And so you've probably got, if I'm really going to talk about it, in I guess in a kind of easy way without getting bogged down in specific details around specific studies, right? It's about a trade-off between signal and noise. So by signal, I kind of mean, if you're doing an intervention, like what is the opportunity for your intervention to actually change the thing that you're trying to change, be that strength or aerobic fitness or anaerobic fitness. So if we took you as an example, right, and we tried to get you fit, not saying that you aren't fit, right? Like I could write you a program and then I could like let you get on with it. But and that would be the signal, right? Like the quality of the program that I write and your physiology's ability to adapt to that, like is I guess a simple representation of the signal. Now all of the other things that could affect that, like your motivation, your diet, the fact that you don't want to stop doing a podcast to go out and train, you're too busy, that's all the noise, right? And so good experimental design tries to really, really get a clear question, and then it tries to maximize the signal and it tries to minimize the noise. And so sometimes I'll read a paper and think, well, I mean, that's a big question, right? It seems really complicated. It seems really detailed. And then I read the method, right? And their attempt to kind of like create the signal is not very good. And there's loads of noise. So for example, right, like there's loads of papers about football performance, and so here's a classic kind of example. Does caffeine impact football performance? And we're doing it with a football team playing a game on a Saturday. Well, we know that a footballer's distances that he runs in a game, right, are really variable. So he doesn't repeat those like with great degrees of accuracy. So there can be up to like a 30% variation in game on game sprinting just as a consequence of like the game and the outcome and all of those things, right? So it's really hard to detect that signal against that big background noise. And now you're also trying to give him caffeine when he's also taking a carbohydrate gel, or he's had a pre-match meal, or the physio is giving him a specific like taping intervention, and he's having muscle activation, right? So there's just like so much going on with all of the other stuff. And that's without talking about how actually little chance you've got of detecting the signal in all of the other stuff that you come to a point thinking, well, I'm not sure they can answer this question in the way that they're trying to answer it. And I think actually one of the problems, I guess, Rob, at the minute I feel with research, and I'll probably take off the table the word problem because it's not really a problem, in that there's so much data around at the minute, right, that people just think, well, I can do that. I've got this data. I've seen that Rob Pacey's wrote this. I can write this. And that's fine. Like because there's lots of reasons why people do research. Like to develop their skills of learning how to write a research paper or to support their organization. I'm not sure all of it is necessarily novel in terms of its findings, right? To in some cases like justify publication in a high quality scientific journal. But that's why we have different quality scientific journals, right? So I kind of think in a way, having all of this research, having all of this information is amazing, right? Because we're all at a different part of our journey and we all need to access information in different ways. I guess what I'd like to do sometimes, and I do it, I guess, now when I'm doing presentations, I just like to be a bit clear about the purpose of why I'm doing it. Because some of the papers that I might be involved in, right, have been about trying to support a PhD student on their journey in learning how to publish an academic paper, not because I've been trying to publish something to say something, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So clarity about purpose, I think, is a fundamental of research, but it's probably also a fundamental of practice and probably all of the things that we're doing in our life. And I definitely remember having a conversation with you, right, a long time ago about this type of thing. Like what are you really doing and why? And that's, I guess that's something at times that people don't really get into in a deep enough way.
I remember them conversations. Which horse racing track was it? We used to meet at. Was it horse?
Oh,
Was it
Haydock.
Haydock? Yes, it was Haydock. Yeah, great. I mean, I know you've dived into a little bit there, but where are we at with sports science research as a whole? And it may be just a rehash of what a lot of the stuff what you've just said, but it'd be interesting to see where the gaps are with research and the gaps in education. Again, you touched on it right at the end there. The gaps in education to be able to do all the good stuff that you've just talked about and not fall into the trap of the bad stuff that you've just talked about.
Yeah, so I think what we've basically got, right, in some cases, if I'm going to try and in my own mind simplify it a bit, is we've got loads of like really clever people in universities, right, who were trying to, I guess, do stuff that pushes on our theoretical understanding, right, in a really deep way. And you know what, some of the things that people can do now with a blood measurement or a muscle biopsy or a set of data, right, is truly incredible. But those people don't necessarily, right, have access to top quality sports people or data, I guess in some cases. And then you've got loads of people who are sitting in the professional sports world, right, who have got like really actually interesting applied questions in some cases. And some of which are of theoretical interest, some of which are not, right. I mean, some of them are just purely practical, which is fine. And they've got loads of data, but they haven't got loads of time. So what you tend to see is the theoretical people often doing, I guess, research studies where the practitioners think, well, that's not relevant, is it? You know what I mean? Like, yeah, it might be really interesting, but can't use that. And then you've got loads of practitioners thinking, well, yeah, look, I've got all this training load data, and the academics thinking, well, you haven't analysed that the right way, or that's the problem with this. So you kind of almost like get all of this information because all of these people are trying to fundamentally, right, I guess, support the development of the field in their own way. And I guess what then we really need is just a bit more collaboration, probably, and a bit more mutual understanding of the skills and the opportunities, I guess, that talking provides both sets of people. And if I'm going to be really honest, right, like, I don't think I'm especially bright. I don't think I'm especially talented. I think in lots of ways, right, and there'll be lots of people who'll disagree with this. Maybe Patrick Ward will be one of them. I'm just hopefully a nice enough guy to be able to be tolerated in a conversation long enough to try and to connect a few dots up.
Yeah, tolerated. I like it.
I just haven't walked into a room and put my ego on the table in a way that makes someone think, well, I don't want to talk to you. And then I guess the longer you can stay in the game and the more you can build relationships and the more you can try and understand something from someone else's viewpoint is inherently the more then that you've got opportunities to do things that other people maybe don't have to do, and so I've been, and maybe that's a skill or maybe it's a personality trait. I've got no idea, but it's not something that I think, oh yeah, well, that's magic. Let's put it in a bottle and sell it, right? Because I kind of feel like most people can probably do that if they really want to. So I guess what I'm saying is I think like the biggest thing that we could probably do is start trying to find a common language because even sports science, right? Terminology is not a common language between these people, right? So this happens all the time, it's a great one, right? Like workload, like fatigue, and I've done this, right? So like I'm kind of like laughing at myself a bit. Someone at a conference talks about workload or writes a paper on workload, do you know what I mean? And I put my hand up or I write something on Twitter as I've done. Well, it's not workload, is it? Well, what do you mean it's not workload? Well, you're not measuring work, are you? Like work's it's like a physics related term, right? We like measure it in a certain way. It's got like a unit, and you've not done that in your paper, have you? So you know what? Even around technical terms, right? We don't speak the same language lots. So there's no wonder then we can't actually kind of have a nice conversation and try and work together now actually to actually, I guess, create research that is much bigger in its scope, right, and that has practical relevance, but also has theoretical insight. So I think developing people, and I think we are probably in a way we can do this now with a lot because all these PhD students, I guess, and people I've worked with who I've just talked about have got better jobs than me, are now inherently the ones in 10 years' time, right, who will be the decision makers in professional sport. So this will transition, I guess, in some ways, and so maybe after I finish, the academics will have a much better attempt to get into sports clubs and do much better research because like it won't be as I guess restricted by barriers of personalities and understanding and of willingness to collaborate and all of those things.
So there is loads of examples, and you've been part of it at Liverpool with embedding PhD students within practical settings. That's obviously a step forward based on what you've just said. But what is the next step? Having that, again, what you just said, having those people who have been in them situation, them practical environments, becoming the decision makers, so they know the flow, they know the progression, or is there something else that can be done right here, right now, that improves bridging that gap?
Yeah, I mean, it will happen with time, right? As you say, like those people will inherently bring with them a view of the world that isn't, I guess, one that predominates with key decision makers. So they will transition. I mean, I think people often think though, like research in academia is like something that it's not. And I actually think, that often comes from academics, right? Like using big words and like kind of trying to demonstrate how clever they are. But we all do research, right? Like I often use an example of a coffee shop. So we've all walked into a coffee shop, right? And we've all ordered a coffee and then like stood for ages in the queue, like waiting for them to give us our coffee. And often when I'm standing in these queues, I think about the person behind the till, and I think, Like, is this person all right with everybody waiting, or does he actually just want to give people like the best service that he can, and he wants to then try and find a way to serve coffee quicker? I'm sure that's what his employees want him to do, right? Because they'll make more money. So I kind of feel like in some ways, like there's a guy in a coffee shop who goes to work and thinks, oh, yesterday at lunchtime I had a nightmare because there was a massive queue and it really stressed me out. All right, so today, like when it gets to the lunchtime rush, I'm going to try and like, instead of like pulling the cups out of the holder every time, I'm just going to try and put some cups on the counter. And maybe if I can get the cup out quicker, right, I'll be able to give someone their coffee faster. And then at the end of the day, he thinks, well, actually, do you know what? Like the queue was a bit better today. Actually, oh, maybe tomorrow I can like pre-prepare this bit as well. I mean, that's research, right? I mean, like, he's thought of a question, he's found a way to try and answer it, he's done something different, he's collected some data and he's like evaluated it. So like we all do it, but we all see it in a much more complicated way than that, right? Which makes it feel like it's the preserve of a certain group of people, not everybody. So there wouldn't be a coach or a sports scientist or a physio or a masseur or a doctor at any level engaged in sport, even people, right, even dads who are helping their kids with their coaching, who weren't doing a coaching session and who were thinking, that was great or that was terrible. What am I going to do different next time? And trying to collect some evidence on it. Do you know what I mean? So kind of feel in some ways, it is about really just trying to say to people, hey, this thing that you think is really complex and that you don't really understand and that you hate. I mean, you're doing it, like I'm just doing it with a bit more certainty. I'm just doing it with a bit more understanding of the method and a bit more awareness of, the impact of this variable on this variable. But like, we can have a conversation about that. And like, actually, once you understand the process, then you're away, and the process really is define the question, find a good way to answer it, collect some data, analyze your data, find a way to present it either to yourself or other people. Any more complicated than that.
Cool. Next thing, so we've touched on the research, evidence-based practice. Where are we at? Given the people that come through your doctoral system, which we'll get onto in a bit, you're coming across such a variety of practitioners in such a variety of clubs, doing such a variety of things with multiple head coaches turning over all the time.
Yeah.
Where are we at with the evidence-based practice that is going on in football? Because I'm guessing a lot of your guys are from football, but it'd be interesting to get that bigger, more rounded view.
Yeah. Okay. So, like, I guess as a scientist, right, you want a kind of, I guess, have some understanding about why you're doing things. And so often, I guess, when I'm talking to people in football, really, I guess, my approach to evidence-based practice is, I mean, is there some underpinning rationale around why you're doing it? And that might not necessarily have to come from a paper, right? Because I'm definitely not naive enough to think that there are people who have got stuff that really works that hasn't come from a research paper. So, I mean, I was involved in some kind of low carbohydrate, low glycogen research like a number of years ago now. And we thought we were really clever, right? That we'd done this paper, and then we realized that the Kenyans have been doing early morning fasted runs for years. So I guess, evidence can come from lots of different places. And I guess understanding why you're doing something is often something, I guess, that I really try and talk to people about. And I guess I think like that, Rob, in some ways, right? Because I think in some ways, like evidence-based practice is a bit of a misconception. Now let me explain that, right? We'll go back to the example of a coffee shop. And there are kind of multinational chains of coffee shops, right, who can roll coffee shops out across the world because the recipe is relatively simple, right? Like here's the bean, here's the same machine, here's the water, here's the cups, Like make coffee in this way, give it to somebody else, and you'll get more or less the same product. Now elite sport, right, and things like training and rehabilitation and performance, right, are not that simple. I mean, they're really complex, dynamic, ever-changing situations. So I don't think in that way there's a right and a wrong way to answer something. There's just, here's the information I've got now. Like what am I doing? You know, like someone hasn't necessarily seen it in a research paper in exactly the same way. So when you've got something really simple, you can probably have really good guidelines on how you do it. When you've got something that's really complex, and in some cases, right, is really about the individual, and at high level football now, right, it's about the individual. It's not even about the team anymore. You know, then where is the research that's told me how to deal with this specific issue on a Monday at this specific time with this specific player? Now, you know, and that's why for me, then it's much more important about actually talking to people about process and understanding where their decision making comes from, right, and where their information comes from, rather than, you know, well, you know, did you not read that paper by Pacey in 2008, and are you not now looking at this in this way? So, you know, and again, this is about then the importance of translation, right, and the collaboration. I think anybody who's picking up a research paper and trying to deliver that research paper with an elite athlete, probably in the majority of cases, has probably got the wrong end of the stick, right? So I think, you know, we're dealing with situations that are actually much more process orientated, that are much more skill orientated, that are much more high level thinking orientated than they are about, here's how I do this. So the way I see it, Rob, I mean, there's a when I'm dealing with PhD students and other people really, and I wrote about this with John Barlow in a paper recently. I use this kind of like do you know model, right? You know, do what technical skill do you need? Know what technical knowledge do you need? But most importantly, like what characteristics do you as a person need to do that? So we always go to the technical skill and the technical knowledge. So, you know, like you have people on your podcast all the time, right, who are experts in knowledge, but the process and the person, right, is in a lots of ways what have enabled them to become technical experts.
Mhm.
You know, the ability to be critical, the ability to time manage, the ability to pull out the right bit of information in the right time against the background of all lots of other stuff. You know, and so I actually feel like those types of skills are really the way I think about evidence-based practice. I think about, well, what's your process? What's your evidence? Not what research papers have you read to do that necessarily, which to me seems a slightly different thing, if that makes sense.
Mhm. The next thing I was going to ask you was about things that are overhyped in our industry, but I'm going to flip that a little bit based on what you've just said. And are them kind of things that you've just described, the skills and the characteristics of the person and how they're able to time manage, be critical, are they the things that we undervalue and overvalue the converse? Okay.
Yeah. So if I rang a football club up now, right, and said I can reduce your injuries by 10%, I could write my own check, right, to go in and do that. So when there's something with a definite outcome, like people are very excited by it. If I rang football clubs up now and said, "Hey, I want to come and talk to all of your staff and try and make them better," and then as they get better, right, all of your other processes around what they're involved in would inherently improve, I'd probably have the phone put down on me, right? So people get outcome, they don't get behavior, and they don't often then connect those two things. So we talk about things like the 24-hour athlete, don't we? And we all know that, but it's not how we act. Like often then the limitation is us, right? And our ability to operate a process, if that makes sense.
Mhm.
So to me, like I have this conversation sometimes with football clubs, like they're talking about like research, and the question often is, well, what has this research done for us? And I'm like, say, well, you know what, like, yeah, probably. Well, research has got a shelf life, right? Like, here's a Nokia 2210. Like, do you want this for your phone? Do you want the TV that you can't speak to change channel? Like you used to have. So research has a shelf life, right? It should have a shelf life because it all should get better. Like what some of these processes have given you is a person in your organization who is now a highly adaptable, flexible thinker who can problem solve and deal with information coming in and make decisions really fast. I mean, that's the benefit, right? So, and I guess you'll know this really. I mean, it's about people. Like people make an organization, right? And so, in some ways, investing in the people and the support and the development of the people inherently will alter the outcome. It just might not happen as fast as you think it should. But the investment over time, I believe, will probably be worth it.
Do you think clubs do that? And maybe touching on just football based on your experience or looking wider, do clubs do that well in supporting their staff to develop as people? And again, touch on the critical thinking, the time management, all that kind of stuff. Do they support them as they should do, in your opinion?
It varies, doesn't it? I mean, like some clubs are amazing. I mean, some clubs I'm sure are pretty terrible. And I suppose what I guess again how I think about it in some ways is right. I mean, it's kind of not core business, but it is core business. And again, then it's about kind of like infrastructure, right? In some ways, and like what you perceive you need. So, like again, at a university, I mean, the university really is about educating people. Does it need a sports centre? Does it need a student union? Well, you could argue not, right? But those things are important in attracting students to that university and then add value. So, again, really, I guess every club is on its own journey, and some clubs are just struggling to deal with what comes on a Saturday, right, in terms of an outcome. Other clubs are able to think about some of this other stuff and then to think about other people. I mean, what I would often say, I guess, is that you know I accept sometimes as I'm talking about these things, I do think about them differently. I mean, I'm not saying I'm unique, right? So I feel like in some cases, if someone like me was having a conversation about it, let's talk about someone's yearly review, right? If someone like me was having a conversation with someone's yearly review compared to maybe someone in a football club who was more outcome focused, then the conversation will be very different. So, it's really hard to say that people are supported or aren't supported, and because I think it really differs. I think there's a big spectrum. But as we're talking about, I think there's definitely, from my view, really, this kind of this under awareness, if that's the right way, of just like how important I think like people characteristics are to these journeys.
Mhm.
And this is the interesting thing, isn't it? I mean, I always think this. I just think if you've got happy staff, I mean, your staff are your first interface with the players. If you've got staff who are stressed and miserable and stuff like that, we don't go into restaurants, right, where the staff are angry, do we? We go into restaurants and cafes where like the staff are positive and happy and have a chat with you, and so I do feel like people are really undervalued in lots of ways.
Mhm.
But I don't think that's about football, right? I mean, both me and you have transitioned out of organisations, I guess, in the not too distant past, and Like it's difficult, isn't it?
Mhm. No, absolutely. Yeah. So the next point I wanted to bring up was pursuing a PhD. And I guess when you came through in, like you said, the early 90s, early to mid 90s, if you had a PhD, it was like if it's like someone in a football club, mind blowing. Like then it went, okay, everyone starts to get undergraduate degrees, and that's the kind of barrier of entry. Then it's gone to masters, and I did a little bit of research. I don't have it quite here with me, based on it was a salary survey, anonymous salary survey in football, and I think it was something like 75% of respondents had an MSc or above in British football, top four
Mm-hmm.
leagues, 2 leagues in Scotland, and 160 in total. So 75%
Mm-hmm.
had a master's or above, many of which
Mm-hmm.
had postgraduate qualifications. Is
Mm-hmm.
a PhD, are we going the way that, are we following that trajectory in a PhD being the next thing that not becomes the norm, but almost is the barrier of entry to get the best guys in the best jobs in elite sport?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's definitely some truth in that, right? So let me just think about it, I guess. Like if I was to put a PhD position on Twitter, um, linked to a football club, I could easily have like 350 applications, right? Now we're all inherently lazy, you know, and so if I could remove, feel bad about saying this in some ways, but I think it's a reality, and it's the thing that sometimes people don't want to accept. I mean, I think if I could remove 200 of those applications, right, from people not having MSCs, and it could give me more time to spend then on the 150 that did, I would do that. And so I think then what you're saying is right. I mean, I just think the industry is so competitive at the minute that everybody is trying to look for a point of differentiation. And one of the key points of differentiation, especially in something that I guess is still seen as in some ways academic, is well, has this person got a PhD? So I don't think it will be long in some cases before that's happening. Do I think you need a PhD to do some of those jobs? Well, not necessarily. Partly yes, partly no. But yeah, I mean, I think there's definitely a trajectory around that. But I don't think that's just sport, right? I mean, I just think if you went to things like the police or to healthcare or to business, right? I mean, there is just this general kind of like scramble up a kind of qualification ladder, right, in order to kind of demonstrate, I suppose, ability. You know what I mean?
Well, it's like, and then to be people my age, like 30-ish, who were, a lot of which were the first people in their family to go to university. I
Yeah,
was, my wife was. Like my mum and dad never had the opportunity to go to university, just like
yeah,
many people's parents. So it's just this natural progression,
yeah,
and
yeah,
you
yeah,
can love it or hate it. That's just how it's going because of more access to funding
yeah,
to these positions, etc., etc.
yeah, yeah, yeah. No, so I mean, it will. A PhD will never be the new MSc, right? Just because of what a PhD is compared to an MSc. But in terms of what you're talking about, in terms of entry qualifications, I mean, the other thing actually that happens is I think lots of people sometimes pick up kind of doctoral training and PhDs when they're thinking about transitioning. And they might not often always realize that they're thinking about transitioning. But a lot of the guys I deal with right now, you know, had an MSc, have been in industry 5 years. I guess in some cases have kind of got that tracksuit and t-shirt and are kind of in some ways looking for something else, you know. So, I mean, I think, yeah, that they at times I think they definitely see it as a pathway to something else.
Yeah, yeah. So when you say doctoral training and PhD, to me that sounds like you see them as two very different things.
Yeah,
Can you define what you mean by doctoral training?
yeah. So the way academic qualifications work right now, I mean, they're leveled, right? So like we used to call it like being in the final year of your undergraduate degree, year 3. Well, now we say you're at level 6 because an undergraduate degree is at level 6, right? Like an MSc is at level 7, and we have those kind of like gradings, right? Because that enables someone to do an MSc in geography and an MSc in sports science, right? And have like an equivalence of learning. Well, doctoral training is level 8. And there is a set of descriptors around what somebody at level 8 should be able to do, just like there's a set of descriptors at level 7 and at level 6. So a PhD is only one way that you can, in some ways, demonstrate level 8 skill. It's only like one potential route to getting, I guess, what I'm going to call a doctoral degree. And now actually there are lots of people, certainly in the UK, in some cases around the world, who are trying to develop different models because, again, like the traditional PhD model was developed like hundreds of years ago, right? Again, for like a specific purpose. And for sure, the people I deal with now like want some of that, but don't want all of that. And so I believe as kind of like academics and universities and things, right? We need to be providing learning opportunities that are kind of like relevant to the skills that people want, really, and the skills that people need. So yeah, a PhD really is only one way in which you can, I guess, go through a doctoral training experience.
So how does what you deliver or have delivered through LGMU and now at Birmingham, how does that differ to a regular PhD? These two, how do they differ?
So a regular PhD, right, actually has got some quite, I guess, kind of like strict criteria around what it has to do. And it definitely has to have novelty, right? And that novelty often is restricted to new theoretical knowledge or new methodological approaches, like relevant to science. So it's adding to our knowledge in the science realm, right? Like in recent years, I guess I've been involved in more professionally orientated PhDs. And in a professionally orientated PhD, the newness, the novelty can be orientated towards your own practice. So that can be you as an S&C coach, it can be you as a physio, it can be to your organization. So if we use an example for you in some ways, like you finding a new piece of technology to do this podcast is not the same as conceptually finding a different way to engage people with information, So that's kind of almost a difference, right? And actually, that comes back maybe to something that I was talking about before in terms of clarity of what you're trying to do. Because I think lots of people who have done PhDs didn't necessarily really want to contribute to science, right? They just wanted the skills that doing a PhD project gave them. And so now I guess some of these newer programs allow us to make questions more relevant to people, which enables us then to, I guess, engage them in a different way with the subject material than we could previously. I don't know whether that makes sense or not.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So the outcome of a PhD, people can then work at a university, for example, here in the UK. Is that a similar situation with these other methods like you've described? Okay. Yeah.
Yeah.
So come out
look,
with
I mean,
exactly the same level 8. Yeah.
Yeah. So if you were to go to Birmingham, for example, and you were to do a traditional PhD, you would have a doctorate from the University of Birmingham. If you did the doctorate in applied sport and exercise science, which is the fancy name for the professional doctorate, you would have a doctorate from the University of Birmingham. We just slightly alter the orientation of the research, and we just slightly alter the process a little bit about how someone gets there. But effectively, in terms of skill, not necessarily in terms of project, right? people should get to the same place.
Mm-hmm. So characteristics for people that are, from your experience, successful on that path, whether it be a PhD or down the professional doctorate route, what do you think people need as a personal skill, characteristics, personality to be able to pursue that and pursue it successfully?
The one thing that I guess I think it's much more personal than it is like technical. That's not saying you can't have technical ability, right? I'm talking about intellect now by technical ability, but I think it's much more personal. I think the biggest thing is willingness to learn, right? So, and let me explain that. So, I'm dealing with people now doing PhDs, right, who are really high level functioning professionals in an organization. So they know what they're doing, largely. But there's this concept called territorialization of knowledge, and so some people when they're an expert in one domain, like, find it very difficult to switch off that feeling that they're an expert in other domains. And so what I guess I sometimes see, right, is someone who is really successful, who is a key decision maker, who has got all of the answers, who knows what they're doing, who can time manage and push themselves through a certain process at work, who now has to accept in some ways that they're at ground zero and they're building up a skill base in a different way. And you're laughing, but that actually is quite a difficult thing for us all to do.
100%. Yeah.
So I spend lots of my time just saying to somebody, like you don't know, like you at the minute you don't know what level 8 is. I mean, you know how to get a footballer back to first team training, right, and competition, and I wouldn't know that. So it's a difficult place for me to get someone to, because I don't really know the challenges in that process and that top end. You don't really know the challenges around like level 8 or what it looks like. So talk to me about it. Show me early drafts of work. Fail fast. But these people and the organizations they come from, like, don't suffer like poor work easily. So they hold on to it, right? They try and make it perfect, but that's like the weird thing. They don't know what perfect looks like, right? So that's like an impossible cycle to be in. So willingness to learn, I guess, ability to come out of your comfort zone and actually say to yourself, well, yeah, you know what, I'm just gonna think back to how I once was and embrace all of this. I'm not going to bring my own baggage of knowledge and put it on the table next to me and say, yeah, now work around that. And actually, it's great that they've got that knowledge, because you can do things that you couldn't do otherwise, right? So actually, I think that's like the biggest characteristic, but everybody thinks it's intellectual ability.
Mm-hmm.
Everybody's like, oh, am I clever enough to do this? Oh, like, can't get all of these high level concepts. I'm like, yeah, well, let's not just do a project that involves high level concepts then. It doesn't mean, right, that we can't teach you the process and develop some of these skills in a way then that, again, just moves you from here to here, and then maybe you'll just be able to do those types of projects later on down the line.
Mm-hmm. So in terms of practice, what does going through that process do for someone day to day, either during or post-process, post-doctoral training?
So what this sounds really aspirational, if you know what I mean. But when people say, when people talk to me about doctoral training, right, coming on, whether it's a PhD or a professional doctorate, I always say to them, why do you want to do this? And they always tell me that, it's because they want to find out some more knowledge about how we rehab hamstrings and stuff like that. And I say to them, yeah, that's great. Maybe we'll do that. I said, what I'm really trying to do is change the way you think. And that really sounds aspirational, right? But I think, like, when PhD's done well, it makes you see the world really differently. So, suddenly you realize that question you've been trying to answer for 3 years is just like too big and messy and isn't like precise enough to be answered. Like suddenly you realize that, every day, the way you've looked at the data that you get from the GPS report alters as a consequence of whether you've just had your lunch or not. you know, and suddenly you realize that I actually, really need to do that in this way. And actually, I didn't realize I could go and get information from here. And now I feel confident enough to have a conversation with person X that I might not have wanted to have before. So, I think there are probably multiple ways. And I think in some ways, Rob, I mean, they're all different for different people. But I think, I would really try and encapsulate them in that, well, it's about changing the way you think. And definitely, I loved my PhD and it definitely changed the way I saw the world. And hopefully you can hear I'm like really passionate about doctoral training actually. And that's why I guess I wanted to do this talk, because I mean, that's such an amazing thing to see happen. And it's such an amazing thing to be involved with, and I've definitely seen examples of that, again, with some of the people who we've talked about, and they've all done that differently, so if like I was lucky enough, I guess, to supervise Warren, and I was lucky enough to supervise James Morton. And if you spoke to both of those people, right, they'd be very different, and they all went through that process differently, and they've probably taken different things to their practice from it. But I think, I would hope both of them would say that it changed the way they thought.
Cool. Happy days. That's been great. Very, very interesting. Very interesting. Anyone that wants to get some more information about you, your work, anything, doctoral training wise, where's the best place to go, Barry?
Yeah, you can find me on Twitter. You can find me on the University of Birmingham's website. And you know what, like it's great to have these conversations really, because as much as I'm passionate about getting people to think about doctoral training, I also accept in some cases it's not for everybody. And often, right, when it's really hard, I think, to sometimes say no to people. And so often, if people are having conversations with people about PhDs, I guess potential supervisors are going to be very reluctant to say no. So in some cases, right, like I just have like sometimes then people can't get independent advice. I guess
Okay.
in some cases is what I'm talking about. And as much as I guess I am associated with the University of Birmingham, much as I want people to come on that program, I'm also perfectly happy to kind of say to people, what about this? I guess this educational experience is at a level and requires a commitment that's not for everybody. Everybody can do it, but it's a timing issue, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, whether people want to talk to me about coming to Birmingham or research, or whether they just don't really know who to talk to about some of these issues, then I'd be more than happy to try and help.
Superb. Well, thank you very much for the last hour. Really glad we finally lined it up, and we'll catch up soon, hopefully.
Yeah, we'll wait for Patrick Ward's feedback, eh?
Yeah, let's. And if he's done all the right things, it'll be super, super critical. So, but no doubt he will. A few jokes in there as well. But really appreciate it, Barry. Yeah, great to chat.
Rob.
Great to chat. Thanks,
Okay,
mate.
thanks. Bye.